very, very briefly, just to give a small context, the facts, how this started. And
well, the story began in 2005-06 when one reporter on the News of the World was arrested, together with one private investigator. And the story could have ended in 2007 when the reporter and the investigator were both sent to jail. And as far as the world knew, that was essentially it. Everyone wanted that to be the story. So there was one bad apple, one private investigator, and there was a lot of excitement at the time. The editor resigned, saying that he had no idea that it was going on and it was this one bad person. And the story then went to sleep until July 2009. In the background, Nick Davies, the Guardian reporter, had been writing a book about the media, which was called Flat Earth News, and it was about how the media had become degraded, and it had chapters on what he called the dark arts, which were the use of private investigators, invasions of privacy, and so on and so forth. So Nick had been working on this story, and in July 2009 he came to me and said, I've got this amazing story which is about how James Murdoch paid nearly £1 million to stop evidence coming to light that showed that it wasn't just one reporter. We published that story in July the 8th, 2009. The police came out and said there was nothing in it. News International said there was nothing in it. The regulator looked at it and said there was nothing in it. The rest of the press didn't report it much. And it's essentially been a story of nearly 2 years since then, where bit by bit that story has begun to unravel. And then suddenly, 3 or 4 weeks ago, we published a story that Millie Dowler, the girl who was murdered by a paedophile, had her phone hacked, and not only had her phone been hacked, but the private investigator working for the News of the World had actually deleted the messages in order to get more messages that he could listen to. And this had given false hope to the parents of Millie Dowler. And that was just a story that completely changed the nature of this story that we had been running for 2 years. And suddenly everybody woke up and saw that this was a terrible story. And since then it's led to the resignations of the 2 most senior police officers. It's led to the closure of the paper. It's led to numerous arrests. It led to people in the highest reaches of News International and News Corp resigning. It's led to parliamentary inquiries, and it's led to a chain of events that I think will now dominate British politics for the next 2 years. So that, very briefly, is...
Yeah. In part, you've already replied to how the scoop was born. Can you elaborate a little more for what you can say how Nick Davies came to know these, in which circumstances?
Well, Nick's a journalist who works on his own. He takes a long time over stories, so he'll typically write 3 or 4 stories a year, but they're always very powerful stories. He likes writing stories about, as he sees it, abuses of power or abuses of power, and that's how he came to write this book about the press. He thought that the press had it's to do with the economic crisis in the press. We can talk a bit about that later. But so what he saw happening in newsrooms was that the number of people who were doing original reporting, which is why we all come into journalism, was diminishing. And what was replacing it was what he coined this word churnalism. So it was churning journalism. Churning, essentially, a lot of it was material derived from PR, from public relation. So this was the story about how journalism had been corrupted. And during the course of that, he then uncovered some very dubious practices about, again, it was almost out of economic need that people wanted better and better stories in order to drive circulation. And actually a very cheap way of doing that was to just go and get a private detective to it's incredibly cheap to listen to somebody's phone messages. And something that I think began in celebrity culture. So it's a lot of these stories began with celebrities being hacked, and then it sort of leapt across a firewall into politicians being hacked, and then it leapt into a situation where anybody was hacked. So if you were a murder victim, you could be hacked, and so you could see what was happening was that a culture was building inside the newsroom, where people just discovered that this was a standard way of getting stories. So along comes Nick, and Nick he's three things. He's a brilliant finder out. He finds things out. So he's my age. He's 57, but he still loves knocking on doorsteps and making phone calls, and he's got immense curiosity. He's very good at persuading people to talk. So you need that in a good reporter. Secondly, he's very, very clever. He's got a sort of broad vision. So you've got brilliant reporters who just can deliver a story, but Nick can deliver a story and place it into a context. He can see why the story matters. He can see the bigger political dimensions of a story. And the third thing that Nick's got is he's a very good writer. And you quite often get brilliant reporters who are good at one of those. But to have one reporter who's good at all three is very, very rare. And so, he came along, he could see the importance of these stories, he could write them brilliantly, but I think the most important thing was that he's just incredibly tenacious at finding things out. And he got everybody in this story to talk to him. So, the lawyers, the police, the victims, the reporters, the executives, because he knew the story inside out, they trusted him. So that's how he did it.
Yeah, but I've seen his website. But is he in staff with the Guardian?
No, he's
a freelance.
He's freelance, but he only works for us. Yeah.
Okay. And can you tell me something more about his background? Well,
he trained. He was at Oxford. He then trained on the Mirror Group scheme. But when he came to London, so he trained in the West Country, and then he came to London and joined the Guardian on the same day that I joined in 1979. And since then he's worked for the Observer. He's worked in America a bit. He's written a couple of books. He worked in television, and then when I became editor, I recruited him back onto the paper. So
in a way, you got many things in common with him,
well,
career-wise, and yeah.
He's a much better reporter than I am, but we've known each other for a long time, which I think we have a sort of relationship of trust, and so I've always known what a brilliant journalist he was, and I think he thinks I'm okay as an editor.
Okay. He said he was in Oxford, but what did he major in? If you,
I think he did politics, philosophy, and economics.
so you didn't falter when he comes into this room and he says, "Listen, I've got a story for you." You never. It happened the same with WikiLeaks, right?
Yeah. You know, he's developed this habit of coming in with these amazing stories that you know are going to cause a lot of trouble. But you know, I think an editor's, if you're lucky enough as an editor to have a brilliant reporter who works with you, your job is to get these stories into the paper. That's what.
Yeah, but in that case, these two cases, I mean, the last one and WikiLeaks, how do you protect yourself? I mean, at the point you call lawyers to find out what the implication could be of those stories, or I mean, you just
I mean,
you consult with the deputy editor, and
there's
more
I mean,
crisis unit or
with both these stories we had. So you know, Nick brought in the WikiLeaks story, and he brought in the phone hacking story, and they're both immensely important, globally important stories from within the last year, and they both required working in a quite sort of closed way within the paper, because they were obviously very sensitive stories. But you know, you work with a small unit of colleagues, you work with your lawyers, you work with a small number of editors, and I mean, WikiLeaks was very closed off. Phone hacking's been more open.
Okay. Last question about Nick, and then we proceed with the rest. In the case of WikiLeaks, there were them who approached him, or it was him that.
Well, Nick always jokes that he reads the paper to find out where the front page story is, because he has a very low opinion of editors. So he knows there are good stories in a paper, but he thinks we're too stupid and we missed them. And in a paper one day, he saw that Julian Assange was on the run with this cache of documents. So you know, Nick just sits there and thinks, that's the front page story. You know, why are we using it like that? And so at that stage, he doesn't ring me up. He starts trying to find it. You know, and at that point, Julian Assange was trying to hide from everybody. So you know, Nick had to work out how to get to him. And then he found him, and he knew that he went to meet him. And so he came at that point. He came to see me and said, "This is this fantastic story. You know, you're too stupid. You missed it. But there's this man who's on the run, and he's got millions of secrets. Wouldn't it be great if we found him?" And so he then found him. He's a very good talker, and he's very persuasive. So he persuaded him to work with us. And then he came back, with the password. And we took it from there. So
okay.
It was Nick finding Assange and persuading him to work with us that started that.
Okay, so he enjoys high degrees of autonomy. I mean, he moves by himself, and then he comes to you and says, "Listen, we got this."
Yeah, he would say, this is all part of his book, that if you put reporters in like sort of battery chickens and give them no time, they'll never find things out. So, it's a fundamental thing about journalism that sometimes you have to allow reporters a bit of time, and then they will find things out, which is what they're supposed to do.
How much did you risk by challenging such a powerful target? In the case of Murdoch, I mean, he's the emperor. He's got 3 continents, kind of empire, and what were your inner reaction and what?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's become apparent, I think, during the course of this, is that this was an organisation that nobody wanted to take on. They were a bad enemy to make. So I kind of knew that. It was a very powerful group. And what I didn't know at the time, but became apparent, was that they felt they had some kind of immunity. So they felt they were untouchable. The police didn't want to take them on, Parliament didn't want to take them on, the regulator didn't, and the rest of the press didn't. So, maybe I was a bit naive in not seeing all that at the time, but in a way that seemed to be the story, So because the moment Nick came in and said, here were these documents, the police had these documents. They knew that it wasn't just one reporter. So why didn't they look at it? Then you thought, can it be that the police were part of the cover-up? So I don't think it was. I knew that we were taking on something that was quite big and quite frightening. But the full extent of the nature, the way British society had moulded itself in order not to take this force on, I think, only became apparent during the course of the investigation.
What kind of pressure did you receive for this story? And in which
well,
way?
I mean, on the first day when the police came out and said, "There's nothing in this." What do you mean? There's nothing in it? It's this is an extraordinary thing that's happened, and the police immediately come out and said, "No, there's nothing here." I mean, that was a sort of bit of a clue as to. But I don't like seeing conspiracies, so I didn't see how all these things joined up at the time. So I mean, then the regulator came out in November and said, "There's nothing here." And what's interesting about the last month is the parliamentarians, the MPs, have confessed they felt intimidated. We didn't like to ask these questions. We didn't like to press Rebecca Brooks to come to the committee because we were intimidated. And there were some direct threats, I think, to the MPs.
Yeah. In which way they felt intimidated? Because they were afraid that she could write something very nasty about them?
Yeah.
So, so far it has been discovered that politicians have been hacked as well? And
policemen.
Huh.
No, I mean, I think...
Yeah, but the results were never published, right? Because so far there were celebrities, British soldiers hacked, and then the little Dowler, and Prince Charles and the Royals family.
Two of the policemen who were most intimately involved in the story have had marital difficulties that have been written about in the press.
What?
Marital difficulties that have been written about in the press. So, and in the past, MPs that have challenged the power of the tabloids have found their private lives written about. So, again, this is, I think, what people are now admitting is the story is about a huge corporation that is everywhere. So, it has all the sports rights, it has all the films rights, it owns the satellite pipes, it has the posh papers, it has the down market papers, and this is a crucial bit of it, it has these private investigators. So it was understood in at some level in British public life that if you upset this company, the bit down at the bottom, the private investigators would set to work on you. And so that made people right up to the level of Prime Minister. Who wants that? Who wants to be worked over? And you just have to believe that. for the force to work. So it doesn't. These people didn't have to be threatened.
As long as you felt
You
that you have
believe
a secret, I mean, you knew that.
Yeah, and we've all got secrets, you know.
Yeah.
And all you've got to do is to believe that the consequence of doing X would be Y. that changes the way that you behave.
Yeah. It really took a long. I mean, when you have 4,000 targets, it's there's a high chance that some weak links, in a way, comes out.
This was the extraordinary thing. So, up to the end of last year, we kept saying to the police at that point that they moved from a handful. In July 2009, it was a handful, and they specifically denied people like John Prescott, the Deputy Prime Minister, the person who came out and wrote in the News of the World the following Sunday, it's a handful, and you know, I keep reading the stuff about John Prescott. John Prescott wasn't there. Well, he was there. And then at some point, the civil actions began. So lawyers started following in the footsteps of Gordon Taylor, and the figure moved to 91. And the police came in here and tried to persuade us not to do the story. And so we sent a Freedom of Information request. We said, tell us, you won't tell us who the 91 was, but tell us what category of person they were. Because we knew by then they were the royal family, the security services, politicians and celebrities. So we said, why don't you just break it down for us? Tell us how many royals, how many people work in the security system, and they wouldn't do that. So right up to the end of last year, we were still thought there was 91 people. I mean, we didn't think, but they were saying. And it took the lawyers, who then started getting into court and dragging out all the paperwork, for more names to come out. And then we realised there were 11,000 names in this book. And it looked as though there were 4,000, at least 4,000. We had to call them targets because we don't know at the moment how many were successfully hacked. So that's the short answer. So the millidollars are only now coming out because the police, for the first time, have done what they should have done in 2006, which is to put every name into a database and then find out who all these numbers are and cross-checked.
Yeah, what's the difference between this 11,000 figure and the 4,000? That 11,000 were all...
Well, as I understand it, I think that there are 4,000... Sorry, so there are 4,000... The policewoman in charge of the investigation, so there were 4,000 mobile numbers and another 3,000 landlines. So, I mean, nobody knows exactly, but there are thousands and thousands of numbers.
Yeah. Yeah. Was it worth it? I mean, all of this big mess. It was a way to. It was a way to bust circulation. I mean, the original motivation was just that, or was also a way to influence politics.
Well, I think all these things linked up. So, and as an external observer, it's very difficult to comment on what Rupert Murdoch has in his mind. But you know, it's undeniable that he had commercial objectives that he wanted. He wanted the whole of PSKB, and that was going to require government and regulatory approval. He seeks to achieve political influence. And again, it's what people believe is almost as important as what happens. So people have believed for 2 generations now that you can't get elected without Rupert Murdoch's papers backing you. And then he wants to sell more newspapers. So all these things sort of coincide. So, you know, last October, Murdoch switches from the Labour to the Conservatives. That's the political bit. But he also wants something. So Cameron wants his support, and Rupert Murdoch wants the green light for his deal. So neither man has to say anything. They both understand what the other says. So I'm sure you could have tape recorded them, and that you would never have found a conversation in which that was raised. But you don't have to. Both knows. So Murdoch supports him. Cameron gets into power. Within days, Murdoch is going through the back door of number 10 Downing Street, and they have a nice chat. And then within weeks, the application for B goes in, and Cameron says, and so all these things begin to happen. And we now learn that Cameron met with News International people 26 times, and that he did discuss the B Sky bid with in some of those conversations, though he won't say what happened, and he claims that it's all fine anyway because he didn't play a part. But so it's a process in which people want things, which are, as I say, partly commercial, partly political, and partly it's about building circulation and earning money.
I didn't know about this fact that Cameron met 26 times with the guys.
Well, since in the last month, Cameron has revealed all his meetings.
Yeah.
And he's come up with 26 meetings with Murdoch, James Murdoch, with Rebecca Brooks, with senior editors.
Talking about what?
Well, then it was a debate in the Commons, and somebody said, "Did you talk about B Sky B with them?" And he ducked the question. So another MP says, "Did you talk?" He was asked 7 times, and he wouldn't. Each time he dodged the question, and so we can take it that they did. He said, "Did you talk about B Sky B?" And he says, "I did not have any inappropriate conversations."
It reminds Bill Clinton about...
I did not. Yeah, correct. Somebody wrote that at the time. I did not have any inappropriate...
Yeah.
What do you mean by an inappropriate conversation? So yes, he did talk about it.
Yeah.
So that was reckless, wasn't it? I mean,
yeah.
Why would...
It reminds of Berlusconi who doesn't want to reply to the 10 questions. I mean, once you don't reply to the question, you have already replied to the question. Yeah. It's a non-denial denial, as Nixon used to say.
People are now saying, well, given that you knew that Coulson was under suspicion, why was it so important to appoint him?
Yeah.
And then you ask the question, what kind of vetting took place? And it turns out the answer is he was barely vetted at all. Where all the previous press secretaries have been vetted so that they can look at the high-grade security. Coulson wasn't until the autumn of last year, and then they decide they're going to vet him, and then he suddenly resigns. Is that because he doesn't want to be vetted, or does he know he's going to fail the vetting? And did he sit in security meetings despite the fact that he hadn't been vetted? So Downing Street is like your 10 questions. Downing Street won't answer any of these questions now. They said, we're not going to go there.
Well, and what do you think it will be, the consequences for Cameron? Will he survive to this?
I think, it's obviously damaged him because it speaks so poorly about his judgment. People warned him, we warned him. There were moments when we couldn't report things, but we felt it was important that he should know. And so he shouldn't have been in any doubt by May 2010 that this was a very reckless thing to be appointing Coulson. But he went ahead and did it, so that has damaged him. So the question is whether during the coming period that there is more, whether, who else warned him about it? Did he have official advice from his officials that he ignored? Are there notes of meetings, these meetings where he discussed B-Sky-B? So, he's going to be asked all these questions. So I think he's still he could still be in difficulty with this.
We in Italy, we tend to look at your journalism, your tradition as the golden standard. Should we start to make better distinction? I mean, there are at least two very different kind of journalistic tradition in Britain.
Well, my pat response is that this is journalism at its worst and journalism at its best. So, Nick Davies shows the best of what journalism can do. So we mustn't write off all journalists. And there are some, extremely good journalists and good papers in this country, I think. So I don't think our faith should be damaged in what British journalism is at its best. But there was something did badly go wrong, and the fact that nobody woke up to that, it was a bit troubling. In terms of if you're going to have a system of regulation of the press that we all buy up to, and it so completely fails, then I think that's a bit worrying. We've got to find out why that was.
Yeah, because if only the Guardian reacts, and that was the case, there are some other quality newspaper in England, and at the very end, you were the only one who raised your hand.
In the last few months, the FT did some good work, and the Independent did some good work. And right in the last sort of after Millie Dowler, the Times finally did something. But it's there was this bizarre moment when Andy Coulson in October 2010, there was a huge industrial employment tribunal against him. Somebody who sued the News of the World while he'd been editor, and was awarded £800,000 for, and it was described as a culture of bullying. Well, Coulson was at that point was 5 months from walking into 10 Downing Street. I mean that's a story, isn't it? I mean that's the man who's going to be at the heart of Downing Street, €1 million in damages, and nobody reported it. Except,
sorry, this was 5 months before you went to Downing Street.
Yeah. So it was at the end of 2009, this period when nobody was writing anything. So why was that? Because people say, people didn't, the newspapers didn't write about this phone hacking because they'd done it themselves. But this was just a straightforward story of, about a very prominent public figure having €1 million in damages, and for some reason, all the journalists in the country didn't think that was a story.
So what's your answer to that? Why didn't they write about it?
I don't know.
Okay. This scandal demonstrates that News Corporation has become a real political force in its own right, rather than simple media company. How did it happen, and what does it mean now? I mean, such a powerful.
Well, I think one of the good things that sometimes, having lived in Britain all these years, in the last month you've pinched yourself watching the television, seeing the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition standing up and attacking News International. I mean, you just think that would never have happened at any point in the last 30 years. And I think the moment that happens, it's you can't go back on that. It's like the Wizard of Oz. You're familiar with the Wizard of Oz, the film?
Okay.
Do you know the Wizard of Oz, the film? And at the end of it, they pull the curtain back, and there's just an old man. It's like the mystique has been punctured. So the moment you've got 200 MPs standing up saying we're not going to take this any longer, and you've got a unanimous vote of the House of Commons blocking the B-Sky-B bid, you've got these powerful inquiries that are going to forensically establish what went on. I think News Corporation is not going to return to its position of most power in the country again. It's just not.
And then some additional damage could come from the US, because the US, the SEC could.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what there is. Nobody knows the truth about these 9/11 claims, but obviously, and there's this Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. So there's lots of bad things that could still happen in America.
What can we expect next? I mean, the latest news is this mass deletion of emails, which is kind of worrying. I mean, if you destroy all these pieces of evidence, probably you have something to hide. And so, what can we expect next, and what consequences this scandal will entail for the British society in general and for the political system?
Well, I've given up predicting what's going to happen next, because who a month ago would have said the News of the World wouldn't be published any longer. So, but today we've heard the managing editor of the former managing editor of the News of the World has been arrested. So I think there are likely to be more arrests. The story about the deletion of emails is one of those stories it's impossible to evaluate today, but it might be very significant in the future. I would expect there to be charges in the autumn. And the Leveson inquiry starts in October. So there's going to be a series of court cases, civil cases, criminal cases, inquiries. So that's got a sort of momentum of its own now. And bear in mind that when they closed the News of the World, they said, "You'll understand in a year's time why we did it." They know things that we don't know. There are bad stories that they probably know about now, and that may include the hacking of emails as opposed to just, we don't know what else they now are preparing to do their damage limitation about. And the impact on British society is, I think, but there's going to be, an examination of the relationship between the media and the police, relationship between the media and politicians. But I think the most important thing is to make sure that we can't return to a situation of dominance by one company. The lessons that we all thought we knew about plurality of the media are so important, and you just can't have a country where one person or one corporation has that much power. It's very dangerous. But you know that.
may we say that we can draw this very bitter moral out of the story that good journalism is the one who's preventing bad journalists from overcoming in society, but then the good journalism is having deep financial problems, and the bad journalism is doing well from a commercial point of view. I mean, the News of the World was for
highly profitable.
Highly profitable.
Yeah. Well, that's true. I mean, it's unfortunately the case that the kind of journalism that Nick Davies does is slow, it's expensive, and it doesn't have mass readership, and serious papers the world over are struggling financially. And the good news, I think, is that the Guardian is getting an enormous global audience now. So during July, we were read by something like 50 million people around the world. So the Guardian's never had a bigger audience or more influence or impact. And that's increasingly the case with the Guardian's journalism. That the people realise that it's independent, it has integrity, it's internationally engaged. So whether it's Tahrir Square or phone hacking or WikiLeaks, people are turning to what we're doing. So I think we shouldn't be too gloomy about the ability to still do good journalism and to find a big audience for it. But we all know the problem is monetizing that. It's not a problem of journalism; it's a problem of the business model. I think it's important to remember that because it takes you into a different discussion about paywalls and all that kind of stuff. But I always think you just have to begin by thinking about what the journalism is, and the audience will come if you do good journalism. You'll find the audience, rather than beginning by trying to erect some kind of arbitrary business model that may or may not work, that is going to limit access to the journalism and maybe inhibit the journalism.
By the way, Martov was the champion of the paywall in the Times, and
yeah. Well, it's kind of sort of part of the same picture of it's about control, and he had control, and that model did very well for him. So, and it's a 19th and 20th century idea of what a newspaper is, and he's trying to the most closed model of a paywall is about trying to retain that kind of control. I don't think it works, but that's a different discussion.
You are on the opposite side of the spectrum. I mean,
well,
the Guardian.
I think.
Will it change? I mean, yeah.
I think that without getting completely sidetracked into a different discussion, my strong feeling is that given the completely changed nature of the information ecosystem, where anybody can publish, unless you can begin by acknowledging that and making your content live in that world and be related to that world, and so that it has a relationship with that world, which is very difficult to do. If you put a huge barrier around it, it can't have a relationship with that world. So unless you can begin by understanding that, you're going to end up with something that is not as good as the organisations that do have the relationship. So that's what I believe. Now, so I think one will be journalistically better than the other.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's another story.
Yeah.
We are done. Going back to the moral that we can draw. So there's still hope for good journalism, which is also paying its bills in a way.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's going to be some time. I think it could be months, could be years before this new economic model emerges. But I think the reaction to what the Guardian's done over the last month has been extraordinary. I'm sure you've heard the same on La Repubblica. You have a passionate belief in the traffic's gone up, circulation has gone up, and people believe that's what journalism should be. You know, it's almost like a rediscovery of what journalism is about.
Yeah.
So, but it may take time for that to. But you know, at the same time, we're losing money. You know, so.
Yeah, as you perfectly know, I mean the Dutch report, while Newsweek was waiting to double check, triple check the story of Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky, Matt Drudge gave it immediately, and I mean it's a one-man operation, so the costs are very low, extremely low. It's like wiretapping someone. I mean, and then you shovel on the website. I mean, there is this. And Nick Davies, I think is expensive. I mean, at least he's a kind of expensive,
he's
very expensive journalism.
But we broke every story on the web. You know, during July, we published everything the moment we had it, and we were sure that we got it right. So, in a sense, it wasn't a newspaper story. It was a story of the web, and we didn't need the newspaper in order to create the power. It was a story that was being played out in real time, and you know that it was because of the web that it was, you know, this sort of pressure cooker of power of events built up. You know, people were resigning and dying, and you know.
So you never kept anything for the for the paper the day after.
Yeah.
Immediately you broke it in the web.